Patty, thanks so much for being here with us today. We're at the International Seed Federation's 2015 World Seed Congress in Kraków, Poland. 2015 and 2014 have been big years for CSTA. Just this year we were able to get the provisions to UPOV 91 passed. How has that helped the Canadian seed industry?
It started helping the Canadian seed industry even before the legislation was passed. In fact, as soon as the minister started making it clear that that was the intention, was to bring our legislation into compliance with UPOV 1991, you started to see things moving. You started to see some partnerships forming with international companies, with companies in Canada to deliver new varieties, and new partnerships with international companies just to bring things in where we didn't have that before. A lot of things were conditional upon us having the same sort of intellectual property protection environment as other countries, and we even saw some investments, big investments being made into wheat breeding research facilities in Western Canada. So even before the legislation was passed, things were starting to happen just based on that promise. And we were really excited to see at the end of April in the Plant Breeders' Rights Journal that there were actually 12 varieties that are our first UPOV 1991 protected varieties, and of those 12, 3 are wheats and there's 2 oats. So we were pretty excited about that because that's where the investment's really needed in Canada.
It's very exciting and certainly a good thing. What lessons are you continuing to learn throughout this process and as things unfold and are implemented?
What we're learning from an organizational perspective, that it's really reinforcing learning, because it's something that we've been doing for a long time, is you can't do things in isolation anymore. Things need to be done in partnership with people who have similar interests and similar things to gain. Why this actually happened, and I'm 100% sure why this really happened, is that most of the farm organizations, representing by far the largest majority of farmers, producers of all commodities all across Canada, came together to tell the government that this was really important to them, that they needed these new varieties, and that meant they needed UPOV 1991 legislation, and that they would stand behind the government when they did that. And we delivered on that promise, and so did the government. So that was one of our biggest lessons that we learned. We carry that through now at CSTA in just about everything we do. We know that we don't have the answers to everything, and that we need to work with partners in the value chain to achieve things.
I've heard you say that multiple times at the various meetings, and it's been said here at the Congress too. It's not just about collaboration, it's about, it's not just about coordination, it's about collaboration and to truly work together to make
That's right. And it's really not easy for a lot of people to do that, because they think that things have to be 110% what they want, when their chances of getting that are less than 0%. So if you can accommodate the interests and the desires and deal with the fears and the anxieties of the entire value chain and come up with something that will take you 99% of the way, then you've really made some progress.
And every step counts.
That's right.
When UPOV 91 was adopted, you were quoted as saying, "It's crucial for Canada to continue to modernize regulatory and policy measures affecting agriculture and agri-food." What's the next step in continuing to modernize?
We need to get some changes to our variety registration system. The minister just announced a while ago a policy that they intend to implement over the next little while on variety registration, and I'm really happy to say that once again, CSTA, working with our value chain partners, actually got everything that we asked for. And so I'm really excited about that as well. Obviously the devil's in the details, so the broad policy framework is what we were looking for. Now we have to get down to work and get the model operating procedures right, and get the structure of committees right, and get the linkages between grain and seed right in order to make this work. So that was a very positive step, but we still have a lot of work to do. I talk about the linkages between grain and seed. For example, the Seeds Act says that you can't sell seed by variety name unless it's of a pedigreed grade, but there's nothing like that in the Grain Act. So a variety becomes a variety again once it becomes grain, with really nothing behind it to really determine that it really is that variety. So we need to strengthen those linkages. We need to strengthen linkages between the variety registration system and, for example, the Grain Commission's wheat class system. It's very fuzzy right now. We're not sure whether a breeder is developing for a class or he or she isn't, and what's going to happen to that variety and what the Grain Commission is going to do with it after it gets developed. And it's big business, and it has a lot of impact on the bottom line, so we need to do that. There are things around approvals, biotechnology approvals, and that's not just Canada. That's an international thing that's really important. Our world is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and seed can travel through 10, 15, 20 different countries before it reaches its final destination. And countries that haven't approved genetically modified traits, or countries that have different phytosanitary regulations, can hold that journey up, and it really has a big impact on our industry. So we've still got a lot of work to do. We've made a lot of progress, but we've got a lot of work to do.
I was going to say that while it's really exciting, the things that have been accomplished and the great achievements that have been made over the course of the last few years, and especially during the recent months, you know, there's still progress that needs to be made and work to be done, as you stated. What's your advice to other countries that are working to modernize their legislation, and how would you encourage them to kind of navigate that process?
Well, every country's different, obviously, and everybody's starting from a different starting point, but that's a question I get a lot from them. And the question they always ask me is, how did you get the farmers on board? And the answer I always give them is, you tell them the truth. You allow them and ask them, not just allow, ask them to help you design something that's going to work for everyone. You will be willing to make compromises and know that you can't do it without them. And so they ask me that question a lot. I think too, we deal a lot in ISF and some of the working groups, we're dealing with African countries and Indian countries, countries that are not as far along in terms of modernizing regulations as we are. And I think it's just helping them by giving them our experiences, even though sometimes they're not quite the same. I had a meeting with the Polish Seed Association today, and she couldn't even grasp the fact that we have a private sector that can take things on and do things as a self-regulated process. So then you have to take a step back, and you have to try to put yourself into their position. I think that a lot of them are looking for ways to modernize within a system, and I think the best thing we can do for them is to understand their systems and then try to use our examples for them, whether, you know, sometimes they don't always apply, but I think their biggest question is, how do we accomplish this, and how do we bring the farmers on board?
There are no two countries alike, and when you're here at this Congress, it certainly becomes crystal clear.
Yes, it does.
The European Patent Office recently determined that plants and plant materials derived from conventional breeding are indeed patentable, and that made quite a buzz in the news industry, and the European Seed Association came out and said that it was against the decision, or was very critical of the decision. What recommendation do you have for those who are concerned about balancing the need for protection of intellectual property with the rights of society?
Well, first of all, Canada has also allowed the patenting of groups of cells. It's been happening for a couple of years now. There have been dozens, if not more, patents that have been granted to plant material. Some people call them cell patents, some people call them variety patents. I think that it's not a communication, because we've been learning this week that communication is generally us talking to ourselves, and what's really important is collaboration and involvement. But people need to understand that the protection of intellectual property is a societal benefit. That if you can't generate the funds from your inventions to continue to invest to deliver new inventions for them, then you're not just not benefiting yourself as a company, but you're not benefiting society. And I think people need to understand it, and they do understand it in some sectors. They don't understand it as well in agriculture. So, you know, people don't have a problem buying computer software and paying intellectual property fees for that. well, most don't, but they do have a problem when it comes to plants and seeds. But I think part of it is to get people to understand that, and you do that by showing them what you can deliver when you can generate the funds to deliver it. So I think the CSTA doesn't have a complete policy on that actual one practice of whether or not you can patent groups of cells. We do say that we believe that our members should be able to protect their intellectual property to the greatest extent possible, and we're exploring all kinds of things, including the use of patents. I know that the European Seed Association is concerned about the impact on the use of material for further breeding. That's their biggest concern. And I think that if you look at some of the conventions around the world and other things, I think that there is still opportunity to ensure that there is material available for breeding. And what we really need to do is we need to generate the funds so that we can continue to innovate and deliver the varieties that farmers need.
It's really about that innovation and making that drive to reach the next level in terms of production. There are 3 international seed associations, or scratch that. There are 3 international associations that are working or supporting an international system of cooperation for plant breeders' rights. How do you feel about that idea, and where does CSTA stand?
It's a great idea. Like I said before, the world is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and seed that's produced in Canada doesn't always stay in Canada, and technology and developments that happen in Canada don't always happen in Canada. And what's happened in plant breeders' rights is a perfect example of how important this is, because countries were not willing to deliver their innovations to Canada because they couldn't protect it the same way in Canada as they could in other places. This international system of cooperation is essentially streamlining and harmonizing the application process so that a plant breeder can apply for plant breeders' rights in more than one country at a time. And it's a very complicated process with computer scientists and software guys and IT guys, and I don't understand it, but I know that the end product is something that would be very, very beneficial, because you could apply once and get your protection around the world so that your seed can move around the world. And so that doesn't just mean that we could export, it also means that we could have access to material from other countries. Unfortunately, Canada's Plant Breeders' Rights Office right now doesn't have the resources to participate quite as much in depth as the Seopora or Seopera, some people call it. Those are the ornamental people. And UPOV and ISF can, but we're doing our best, and we're lending as much support as we possibly can. Our Plant Breeders' Rights Commissioner does go to the meeting, so hopefully by the time they get their first pilot, which is going to be on lettuce this fall, hopefully by the time that gets proven, we'll have the resources so that we can start to participate in this process, because it's really exciting.
Great. Well, Patty, I know you're on a tight schedule here. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us and talk through some of the issues that are front and center. So thank you.
Thank you. It was fun.
All right.
Take care.